Okay, our last section here of chapter 2 is going to be titled Other Faces of Capitalism, or really other faces of a mixed market economy. And we're going to look at 5 examples of countries, and we're going to see that they all have kind of varying degrees, varying levels of capitalism. Um, and then we're going to kind of take a dive and figure out why each country has the success or lack thereof, um, and whether or not that has to do with the fact that these are market economies or other historical realities. Right, and the first of these 3 countries that we're going to take a close look at is, or 5 countries, excuse me, is Japan. And without digging straight into Japan, we should remember who Japan is. Japan was the first Asian country to get on board the Industrial Revolution in the mid 1800s. The old story goes that there was an American ship that pulled into the harbor at Japan and started kind of negotiating with the local leadership. And instead of rejecting the Americans and Western influence and trade, they embraced it. They said, "Teach me more. I want to learn about your new technology. I want to start some factories." And Japan, because it becomes the first Asian country to fully embrace the Industrial Revolution, we're going to see Japan is more powerful than China, big China with a much larger population than any other Asian country come the 1940s, pre-World War II. We also then know that after World War II, the US dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan to end this war. And afterwards, the United States decided they were going to help rebuild Japan. They took the old kind of Japanese love of technology and advancement, and they blended it with a very American style market economy. And Japan was wildly successful. Gosh, I remember back when I was a kid in the 90s, Japan had the second largest economy in the world. People thought that it was going to pass the US. Japanese cars, Toyota, Honda, were far superior to American cars at that point, although arguments now suggest the Americans have made a comeback. Um, let's not go down that road right now. So now one issue is that in Japan in the 90s, they started having economic issues. There was very little growth in the economy during this period. Japan has kind of an aging population with more old people, or not much, not a huge bunch of young people and a few old people, but a lot of older people and a smaller number of younger people.
Like in 2 days.
3. Sorry. So because of this, we start to see a shift where there aren't as many young workers to work in the factories. Japan is also wildly expensive. I think Tokyo is maybe the single most expensive country in the world to live in. They don't have a lot of good farmland in Japan. So because of that, they have to import all of their food, which causes prices to go up. It's just a really expensive place to live. All of this being said, what happened was the Japanese started to see a stagnation of their economy. It didn't grow as fast as other economies, ours or China's. China has since passed them by. And in Japan, they start really investing in robotics to work in these factories, since they don't have a lot of young people to work in these factories. And since then, they've become a leader in robotics. Japan's a very advanced country. I believe they're still number 3 in terms of largest GDP in the world, behind only the US and China. So this is a success story of capitalism. Now, is it all capitalism's fault, or was there already a history of um, successful entrepreneurship and business mindedness and hard work in Japan? Yes, I think these played together in that, along with the embrace of US capitalism. Um, South Korea is another country the US rebuilt. Gosh, we went to war with South Korea in the 1950s, or with Korea, with North Korea. I mean, we protected South Korea. We kind of separated South Korea from North Korea, and we helped rebuild South Korea. Again, no surprise, the South Korean economy is wildly successful. They're very capitalist. They embraced our culture, our style economy. They became leaders in electronics. A lot of the electronics that we buy today are maybe made in Korea, certainly in the 90s and the early aughts. And they're now starting their own car industries. They're growing their industry. This is a very capitalist country as well. Now, to compare it to North Korea, which I think that some like to do to try and prove how great capitalism is probably not fair. North Korea, poor North Korea, um, they tried to follow China and Russia into communism. We went to war with them. We bombed them to pieces. The Chinese came in. They helped the North Koreans keep their land because they didn't want a capitalist nation on their borders. But then they just let it go to waste. Both China and the United States have really not treated North Korea especially well. There's sanctions against all of their goods. When the U.S. sanctions you, when the U.S. stops allowing you themselves and other powerful capitalist Western European countries to trade with you, that hurts. And then China never really stepped in to help um, because China doesn't want a powerful country on its border. So I don't think we should be making that comparison. I think we should avoid it. We can say that, yeah, South Korea has been successful, but let's not try and compare them with North Korea because there's a lot of external factors that aren't being considered in this conversation. A lot of interruptions today. Okay, now we're going to get into Singapore. Singapore was a historical trading stop that the British took over. It's a small little country, and they turned it into a really modern capitalist country. It's right in an important waterway that connects India and China and Japan with India as well, and the Middle East and Africa and the West. So its location makes it really important. The fact that the locals embraced the British and capitalism and their place as a trading stop made it really important capitalist city. And Singapore is a wildly successful country. There's a city called Kuala Lumpur that is as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than any European city. But here's the thing. This is Kuala Lumpur. Look at these twin towers. If you ever saw, the picture of the bay with the fountain in it, and the twin towers, it looks one of the most beautiful cities in the world. But look at the poverty that exists right in the shadows of one of the richest places of the world. These young people young guys living in a neighborhood that has, plywood walled houses with rusty steel corrugated roofs. This isn't up to code. This wouldn't even be allowed in our country, but they allow it because they allow for the exploitation of workers. You see, sometimes capitalism goes a little too far in its desire and its greed to make money, and it allows for the richest city in the world to be right next to one of the poorest places in the world, as the people who live there, the natives of this land, are living in the poor area, and it's all of these foreigners who came in and built this capital city where all the money is. Again, I'm not quite understanding why we're using these examples as wonderful capitalisms. Capitalism is proven itself to be more successful economic system, but I think we should try to give some context to these countries before we hold them as these high and mighty examples of why market economies work. Taiwan, look, After World War II, China has a revolution and turns communist. And the old government, which was friendly to the US, packs up its bags, moves out of China, and moves to a little island off China called Taiwan, where the US protects this island and its government from the Chinese. They also said that at some point China will get this island back and now has partial control over the island. This island was wildly capitalist. It was supported by the US, copied the US style government. Whenever you're supported by the US, you're going to do good, like regardless of your economic system. I think it's important in understanding that. It was one of the strongest Asian economies. It was wildly capitalist until the Chinese gained control. Now they're kind of trying to clamp down on them and put more government control over the economy. And that does stifle the economy. That stifles inventiveness and ingenuity and creativity and people's ability to work hard and start their own business and achieve. And, I mentioned in one of these earlier ones that one great thing about capitalism is it plays into human nature. It plays into greed, right? People like having stuff. I like having stuff. I'm a teacher. I didn't take a rich man's job, but I don't want to live in squalor. I like to have nice stuff, and it gives me an incentive to work hard when I'm offered a little extra money for showing up to do a early day or two, or to maybe cover a period for a teacher. I'll do that because, hey, I'll take it. I'll work hard to earn a little extra money. Capitalism offers that, and humans by nature want to grab hold of that, and it benefits the human, and it also benefits the country and the system by having hardworking people. When the government steps in, that kind of takes that away. It takes away a desire to work hard and start your own business. And my buddy Ace, who has his own business, I mentioned before, he's working on the weekends. He's given up a lot of himself to be successful, and he has been successful. But this is an example, I think, a good example of how when the government starts to come in and kind of stifle that pure capitalism, or the more pure, the mixed market economy, and try to move it more towards a more socialist model, that this can lower GDP and growth and these type of measurements. But here's Sweden. Okay, Sweden is socialist. It's a mixed socialist economy. It was more socialist in the past, and they've kind of pulled back on their socialism, largely because the taxes on the top 1% are like 80%. What the book doesn't say, people, is that in the United States in the 50s and 60s, our top marginal tax rate, meaning, and we'll talk taxes later, for every penny, for every dollar you make after $1 million or 10 million or whatever the number is, it was 95% or 94% in America in the 50s. It was 90% in the 60s. It was incredibly high. When the top marginal tax rate was lowered to 70%, that was like, whoa, huge break. So now they say, well, Sweden's top marginal tax rate was 80%. That was too high. Well, why wasn't 90% too high in America in the 50s and 60s when we had wild growth? Well, maybe because we were the only store open in town, because the rest of the stores have been bombed out by World War II. So let's have nuance. Let's color this picture in. Let's not just look at things in black and white. Sweden is one of the richer countries in the world. Sweden has a really high GDP per capita, which we're going to look at here in a second. And Sweden offers free healthcare, free college, free daycare, preschool, many programs to help its people, and its taxes are still higher than ours, but yet they're wildly successful. And sure, they're moving a little bit more towards being a mixed market economy, but they're one of these middle of the road countries. There's a teeny bit, maybe a little bit more market than socialist, but not at all at one of these pure capitalist countries. And they're also wildly successful. So let's take a second and just say, look, I know that there's a desire to make capitalism seem like the be-all end-all, or the mixed market economy, and I think that the numbers prove. You look in your book here at the GDP numbers in figure 2.3, and almost all those countries that are up there are mixed market economies. let's look at a more modern look, because I also noticed that the book leaves out some countries. And look, the number one richest country in the world is Luxembourg. The GDP per capita. Let's talk about it. GDP per capita is basically the average salary for your average person who lives in your country. Okay, so if GDP is the total of everything bought, sold, and made in your country, then GDP per capita is that number divided by population. So under GDP, countries with large populations are more likely to have high GDPs, where under GDP per capita, it doesn't work that way. So the most country with the highest GDP per capita in the world, average salary, is Luxembourg. This is a teeny little spot of a banking nation between Belgium and France in Northern Europe. Sometimes it helps to be sitting on a bunch of oil. Sometimes it helps to have historically been a banking area. Bankers, of course, are very high salaried people. So these kind of factors weigh in as well. Singapore is very, very capitalist. But we also see that they have abject poverty in the shadows of their super rich cities. Qatar is an oil producing country. Ireland, really? Switzerland is these are all small countries, a little speck country up in the Alps. Norway, of course, in Northern Europe, it's really big. Kind of close to socialist. I would probably consider it more of a socialist than a capitalist country. Maybe mixed market, but very middle of the road there. Really big, but also not a lot of people live there. It's very cold. Here's the US, coming in at 7 here, 8 here, 13 in the CIA's list. That's interesting. We're a mixed market economy, of course. And then you have these little small, Macau and Brunei, UAE. That's an oil producing country. Hong Kong. Is that even that Hong Kong's another very capitalist area of China that is under Chinese control, but has autonomy and allows capitalism. Denmark, Netherlands, very kind of socialist, lots of services. Austria, San Marino is a communist country. They don't even mention this in the book. Iceland, Austria, these are European countries. And why are they on here? Why are they so rich? Are they on there because they're more socialist than a pure capitalist? No, it's because these countries were the first to engage in the Industrial Revolution. So all of these factors really come into play, and I just feel like sometimes in this particular chapter, more than most, as we're trying, what I'm feeling like the textbook writers are trying to really enshrine capitalism as like the greatest. Not that it's not, but you probably should give a little bit of context, a little bit of flavor, a little bit of color to nuance to the conversation. And here's Japan, right, coming in at 28, just to look at this list. Where's China? Second, there's India, right? 24. Where was China? Did I miss China? There it is. 73. Communist China. On average, people make what, 17,000 a year? Look at some of the countries above China. You think, oh, China, so rich. Mexico's above China. Mexico's gorgeous. I love Mexico, but very few people call Mexico a rich country, right? Dominican Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Guyana, it's an African country. So let's add some nuance to these conversations. Look, you guys, and then we'll get down here and we'll see, like, North Korea is very much down here at the bottom. I'm not quite sure. These are all African countries we've been taking advantage of. There's Afghanistan. I don't quite find, I can't see North Korea right now. And I'm not going to spend any more time looking for it. It's down there at the bottom. Look, we know that capitalism is a successful economic engine. It helps form wealth in measures that the world had never seen before. But we also know that capitalism can go too far. Pure capitalism and the treatment of its workers and its citizens can be so poor that you see maybe what you saw in Singapore, or maybe child labor of the 1800s in Europe and the United States. And that, I don't know what the right mix is, that almost all modern countries are mixes of socialism and capitalism, and where you think we should be is how you vote and how our leaders will allow it to happen. Maybe democracy is a better measure of economic success, because look, if you don't have a democracy, then your leader just makes those choices, and oftentimes the leader does what's right for them and not necessarily what's right for the people. Although, I mean, China's been growing faster than anyone else in the world over the last few decades, and they're communists and their leaders are making all the choices. So um, nuance. Economics is not as black and white as sometimes discussions about economics tend to be.